Joined now by two men on the board of the PFAA, Brent Fikowski and Pat Vellner. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Where do we find you today? We'll start with you, Brent.
Yeah, I'm home. I'm home in Kelowna, BC, Canada.
Nice. Pat?
I'm in Tampa, Florida.
Wow.
I'm actually here for the Tampa Bay Games for this weekend. Not competing, but just hanging out there and doing some fun stuff with the organizers. So it'll be a fun weekend.
Nice. Okay. Well, we obviously have a lot to talk about, so we'll jump right into it. And a lot of the questions that I think we want to get to are the ones that we have been seeing the most online and comment section, things like that. So the first one I have for you is that you put out your list of demands to CrossFit, and the first two that were on there, the safety and the transparency thing, I think everybody looks at and says, yeah, okay, those make sense. But then the third one, asking or demanding the removal of Dave Castro, why make that demand when the investigation is not done?
Yeah, so for us, I think it's important for people to know that the demands that were made are not exclusive to what's happened this year at the 2024 CrossFit Games. It's not decided and singular to one incident. It's not just about the death of Lazar. It's not just about even our experiences in meetings with CrossFit for the last few years. There's a lot of stories, some public, some private, that demonstrate a continued pattern of behavior and willful disengagement from a culture of safety and continual disengagement with listening to athlete concerns or even opinions from experienced people on any matter of things. And this year's games was kind of just a final breach of trust that effectively has eliminated the trust, I think, in a lot of athletes and people in the space. So the PFAA has expressed the desire to continue to collaborate with CrossFit on a lot of occasions, and we've been met with lack of interest in return. So at the end of the day, what we really want is for the sport to improve and change. And we feel like a lot of these changes are long overdue. And with the culture that exists in the sport team right now, they're very unlikely to happen. And there's unlikely to be long-term growth. We feel it's nearly impossible. So there's still a culture of fear that exists amongst the athletes to speak up. And we think that removing Dave, while not being a singular action that's going to fix everything, it's a start that's going to lead along the right path. And I think it's important to note that it's not removal of him entirely, right? It's removal from the sport team, right? And I think that's a sticking point for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, there were, a collection of the board members that had their names, signed on that list of demands. But I think when you put those out there as an organization, who really is making these demands from a collective standpoint? Can you maybe shed some light on that? And then if you're going to make a demand where you want to replace someone like Dave, is there also a plan behind that of all right, who's going to step in, or do you have someone in mind that you would want to take that place?
Right. So it was a unanimous decision by the board of directors. There's 8 members, and they've been elected in by the peers, by athlete peers, to make decisions, right? And so that's their specific role, is to do that. They have more information. They've spent more time, volunteered their time. They have more expertise, and they're trusted by the peers to make those decisions. And athletes can always, they can voice their concerns with us, and they'd always be taken into consideration. And we're doing our best to continually create avenue for that discourse. But for the purpose of this specific demand, it was the board members that made this decision. We can get into more on voting and stuff, and who makes up the board and how that works and stuff as well.
Okay, so is there any world where Dave stays in his current position with the sport team, but says, okay, now I've learned my lesson. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to change. Is there a world where, if that happens, that you guys would be okay with it?
I'm not sure I don't know what the right terminology would be. I mean, I think if there's competitive athletes that want to compete in a season, I think we'll probably do our best to support them. I just think it's just going to be really, really difficult what we're looking for is meaningful dialogue, meaningful collaboration. And we've attempted to do that for 4 years. And there have been a bunch of instances in the past where it's this will finally be the moment where we have an opportunity to voice our concerns. And I just worry that, this will just continue to happen. And I think there's just a better, I mean, Pat and I spend a lot of time on this, and it's frustrating continually shouting into the sky. So I think we'll probably find a way to focus that energy in a more productive way. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, and I think there have been many chances, right? I think it's not. That's our point. Is this isn't an isolated incident, right? Yeah. There's been a lot of occasions where there's been attempts made, and there's been no reciprocation. So our thoughts now is there either needs to be change, or maybe it's time to start looking elsewhere, creating something new, or there's other things to explore maybe, because I think if you do what you've always done, you can expect what you've always gotten.
And I think that echoes, what we did with Wodapalooza Miami, right? Like we were having little to no communication from CrossFit. So we thought, all right, like how can we improve competition experiences for athletes? And so we're working on continuing our partnership with Wodapalooza, right? And so it looks something like that. I think there's other ways we can spend our time. I think that's kind of where we're headed.
Yeah.
And as far as who would replace Dave, I don't think anyone needs to, in our opinion. That's not really a job title. I don't know who invented hockey or who directed the first Super Bowl, or I think that in most major sport examples that we have, those positions aren't really known or necessary. One major part of Dave's role in the sport team is he programs workouts, and we have a lot of competitions and a lot of other people with a lot of experience doing that. And I think a team of people working together could achieve what he does at least the same level. So, I think that the suitable replacement could be found if that's the direction that was necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or you mentioned the board gets voted in by athletes. Okay. So who exactly does the PFA represent, and how does that voting process work?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the PFA represents the best male and female individual athletes in the world. There's like a rolling 24-month calendar where each month the oldest 24-month gets kicked out. And it's solely based on competition results. And then you have a vote. And so right now there's 143 eligible men and women, so 70 of each. Currently 63% of those are confirmed voting members, and that'll continue to trend up in the next few weeks as the newly qualified members from this year's games, we reach out to them and get them on a one-on-one call, get them to understand what our goals are and how voting works. And then also another percentage is, if you look at the CrossFit Games the last 2 years, let me pull up the number here, it is 83%. So if you were in the top 10 men and women this year or last year, 83% of those athletes are voting members. And so those voting members, they vote in the board of directors. They can attend meetings. We update them. And then we have a new board of directors will be voted in, I believe, in November. And it's the board's job, like in a lot of companies, to handle the operations, right? They have the external calls with events like CrossFit. They have a higher degree of responsibility, higher degree of time commitment. And they still leverage advice from other groups. Like they're still going to obviously get advice and look for feedback from the athletes in the voting group, and even some athletes outside of that, or coaches. And that voting group, not the voting group, but the board provides a level of privacy, right? Because a lot of the members want to remain private. They want to know what's going on. They want to have a say in what's happening, as opposed to just talking about it amongst their friends or talking about it on a podcast. They want to have some meaningful interaction with their sport, but they want to be private. And so the board takes on more responsibility and is also privy to a little bit more information.
Mm-hmm. You may have covered this. My connection kind of got choppy for a second, but how do you determine who gets to vote for what? What's that process look like?
Yeah, so the eligible voting members, that's 143, they vote and select the board of directors. The board of directors have to be within that group, so they have to be eligible. They have to be active athletes, and they're tasked with the major decision making after being voted in. And then there's the executive committee, which are usually non-athletes, and the president, which currently that's myself. And they support the decisions of the board, and they manage more day-to-day operations of the organization. So, and the executive committee doesn't get a vote. They don't get a say in where things are going, but they're still going to advise. And this is how, a lot of nonprofits and athlete associations have been set up, as that's kind of what we've modeled it off of.
there's this sentiment I see sometimes, like, why do we even need the PFAA? Why start this? Like, what was the motivation behind you spending so much time getting this organization together in the first place?
I guess I could answer. Oh, you want to answer that one, Pat?
Yeah, I can do it. So I think for one thing, it's a model that you see in other sports. Changes, particularly around safety or rule changes, like you see rules around head injuries and that kind of stuff come into a lot of sports. That's stuff that is pushed by athletes primarily. They're trying to protect themselves and protect their interests, and they want the sport and the game that they play to reflect that. So when it comes to things that are important to athletes and athlete interests, everybody has a gripe at the end of every competition I've ever been to. People between events are talking about, somebody was hard done by something. And sometimes it's just, it's not, sometimes they're less real than others. And somebody just got a hard judging call and, maybe it was the right call. Sometimes there's things that can be done much better and we can see a clearer path forward. And, in some ways we're the ones that are in the trenches. You can write the thing up and have the way you want it to look as a director of the competition. But then sometimes the practical aspects of how it actually plays out don't always reflect that. And then the people who are on the floor executing it sometimes have really good feedback of how this maybe could have been done better or how some problems could have been circumvented. And then in the back, everybody just, hypes each other up and talks about it. This was bad. Oh, these, rings were crazy and they were swinging around in the wind and there's got to be a better way to do that. And somebody has an idea, but then everybody goes home and then the conversation stops. So this is just a way to channel all that information. And, you can send out surveys and we do the same and be like, hey, did you have any things or do we remember any conversations we had through those weekends, where you can bring people's concerns and start to create a living document or, make tangible steps after the competition is done to make that the next competition does it better. Right. And I think that otherwise you're resetting the board every time you show up to the next competition, and then often a similar mistake gets made or a mistake that could be categorized in the same type of error. Call it like equipment placement, like another equipment placement error. And then every competition there's one of those. And if we could find a way to just make a best practice document of how to space certain types of equipment to protect judges and athletes, could we remedy a lot of problems before they happen? Probably. And like, that's just one example of like the types of things that we see a lot. And it's just, everybody always has them. And we all, talk about it in the back. And then it was just a way to channel those voices into a meaningful area and come together and do something and be able to present something tangible to competition directors to be like, hey, you mind having a look at this? And some really take it in stride and love it. And then some not so much, but that was sort of the impetus of it. And
this has happened in a lot of other sports, right? This is new territory for CrossFit or fitness or whatever you want to call it, CrossFit, but it's not at all new territory for athlete associations to start up. When when the sport kind of reaches an inflection point or a certain size, it happens, right? And we're just in that part of our journey. We're a younger sport, and this is part of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that some aren't as receptive to it, and you guys harken back to the desire for meaningful collaboration. I've seen this kind of floating around a little bit. You guys did an interview with Peter from Coffee Pods and Wads earlier, talking about a meeting in California this year, and then I've seen some discourse around meeting with the CrossFit like at various points throughout the season. Like, can you shed some light on that? Like, what meetings have you had? And if so, like, what took place? And because I think there might be some confusion around what classifies as meaningful meetings or what's just like, kind of lip service maybe.
Yeah. So at the end we had a long talk with Coffee Pods and Wads, and kind of near the end of that, there was a question that like took me really off guard. We had an in-person meeting June 3rd with CrossFit. That meeting was covered by an NDA executed by the PFAA and the CrossFit Sport Team. And so I can say that the meeting did not talk about safety. It was not about the 2024 CrossFit Games. I can't speak. I realize now, I look back at the NDA. So when that question was asked, I was taken off guard and I didn't know what I could legally say. So I kind of started freaking out. I don't know if Pat could tell at the time, but I wasn't expecting the question because so few people knew about the meeting, like really, really like such a small number, a handful of people knew about the meeting. So since then I've reread the NDA. I can speak to the existence of the meeting, but not the specific contents of the meeting. Out of respect, I just haven't spoken about the existence of the meeting at all until now. And so the only people aware of that meeting, to kind of dive into it, is like myself, a few individuals at the PFAA, CrossFit sport team. This information was somehow leaked. I don't know how, and it's been used however it's been used since. We made Don Fall aware of that. There's been a leak. I hope it kind of highlights that we work privately, we work professionally. This is how we talk with athletes, right? This is how we talk to people that engage with us. It's just how we do business. And I guess there was also, so after the conversation, Andrew Hiller posted that there was also a meeting at the Open, which was like, I was at an Open announcement and I was pulled aside before the Open, like, hey, Brent, you want to have a look at this, with Castro and another member of the sport team. We sat on a bench and looked at something on a piece of paper for 15, 30 minutes, different topic than the California meeting. But as we started the conversation, I said, hey, like, I'm going to keep this completely private. It's just between us. I'm going to tell like the executive committee, that's it. Is that cool? They said, sure. I didn't sign an NDA. But the existence of that was just between us. And so kind of back to I just kind of wanted to get that in the clear, but now that it's out there anyway, so in both of those conversations, like they were fine. But like kind of every conversation, and to the point of what we've been sort of hammering home, is after those, we would follow up with emails, we'd follow up with calls, or the attempt to schedule a call. We would send professional documents. Hey, can we redline this? Can we look at this? Can we have some meaningful feedback? And it's sort of that same pattern, right? It's it takes a week or two to hear a response. It's a single sentence. It's a disengagement of like listening to concerns or like actively wanting to feedback, whether that's through the PFA or through athletes, like in other ways. It's not just, because of the PFA moniker. And, we've never said that we haven't spoken with CrossFit, right? It's just that that's not what we're interested in. Like, we're interested in, it shouldn't be, well, when are we going to have another meeting? I sure hope we have another 20-minute conversation off the cuff at some competition another time, right? We want meaningful, structured feedback, because we want meaningful say in the jobs that we do. And I think anyone in any industry would desire those things. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because you mentioned that like offhand discussion in the Open, and that quite literally sounds like any sort of conversation someone from the sport team could have had with an athlete at any point along the lines. I don't know. It's not necessarily something I would classify as like an official, like, two sides of organizations like meeting and trying to hash out stuff. It seems like more like a chance offhand.
And that was more what happened June 3rd. It was on a different pretense, different topics June 3rd. But, like kind of every meeting we've had, it hasn't really led anywhere. So,
yeah.
I didn't know about the June 3rd meeting either. I was like in the middle of having my second kid, moving across the country. I think they let me sit that one out, so I didn't bring my baby brain to the meeting. But I mean, that was a small group. I've been read in since on what was happening, but I mean, again, I think it was covered under NDA, so they weren't disclosing to people, myself included, right? So. I think it's just kind of a sign of professionalism, hopefully from our end, but yeah.
So this is a question I have about that. So as if safety is such a top line concern, it has been for a while, and you get a meeting on the books with CrossFit, then why wasn't safety part of that meeting? If you can speak to it.
I mean, yeah. So I guess we can't talk about everything at every meeting. Mm-hmm. And there are other concerns and other things that, we desire for the sport as well. A lot, like, safety is paramount, but it's not the only thing that is required for a sport to be organized, be professional, be consistent, and to have the needs of athletes met, into the future. So,
did they organize this, or who instigated this?
I suppose it would have been us.
Yeah. And they agreed to, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm. It's also kind of crazy to bring up like every safety concern at every meeting, every time, you know what I mean? Like we operate under some assumption that there's parameters in place to keep us safe. and everybody kind of operates that way. I can't like walk into a meeting with CrossFit or at every briefing be raising my hand to be like, hey, how many AEDs are in the arena? Like, who's got whatever, what are the credentials of every medical staff person? Like, if we were trying to bog down every meeting with like every possible safety thing, then it would be impossible to get anything done. Like, you do have to operate under a reasonable assumption that safety protocols and measures are being made. And then if there's big misses, there's opportunity to be like, oh, wow, maybe we need to look a little closer at this thing or stuff that falls under that same umbrella and make sure that it's tightened up. But, you know, I'm short of like, you know, we sent emails about heat and things like that we knew would be concerns in Texas, but you know, I think there needs to be a reasonable assumption of competence from either party, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, where we are now, it's not like we were ever expecting. We're not playing gotcha, right? Where we're going to send an email with, hey, here's every possible thing that could ever go wrong at a competition, hoping one of them goes wrong, so we can point and say, you know, we did it, like we knew, and you didn't listen to us, right? That's not like, we've tried our best to continually raise like the bare bones, simplest concerns. And some people that have asked me, I've spoken privately, and I kind of said, like, listen, we've been very thoughtful in the things we brought to CrossFit, because prior to, you know, like 2019 or so, there was really like zero dialogue between athlete and CrossFit. So knowing that, it's like, okay, what are the simplest things we can start with to get some easy wins, to get some like reciprocity, to get some like communication. Okay, hey, like, you want this, we want this, easy. And just doing those things has been like an absolute grind. It's been an uphill battle, and it's really hard. It's like, you know, to have a small, if you struggle to have the small conversations about like, hey, where are we going to go for dinner? Like, how can you talk about the big things with anyone in any relationship, right? And it just feels like we've never been afforded that opportunity to have like meaningful, sustained, mature, consistent conversations with the athletes who this sport kind of means the most to, as well as the sport team who, you know, runs the sport and cares about it as well.
Do you feel like anything meaningful came of that meeting that you had? Or it was just, did you feel like it was just more you guys were being listened to or being heard, but not really listened to?
I mean, I think it's just like, I think it's been kind of the same as every meeting. You know, you leave with this sense of, that went, I mean, Pat wasn't at that meeting, but Pat, you know, you go to a meeting and there's just like, oh, sometimes you're like, that was pretty good. I feel like we made some progress. All right. And then you send the follow-up email, you know, 2 days later. You don't want to do it too early, right? You don't want to do it like 1 hour later, because then that looks desperate. So you leave it like 2 days. You know how it is, Tommy. And so, you know, it's like, hey, that was great. Here's our next steps. Here's our next thoughts. And then it peters out like every meeting. So,
okay.
Yeah. I see this. I
think a lot of what we talked about would be underwhelming, right? It's not like it's not like we were wasn't some, I don't know, we weren't solving world hunger or something. But it's
for sure. I mean, I see this a lot. This comment, like, well, if you don't like it, you can just leave, kind of thing. Like, you know, if that's the case, like on safety, like you see this, well, why don't the athletes leave? Like, where's that course of action? I don't know. How would you respond to that?
I mean, we love CrossFit, right? Like we love to do it. We love the sport. Like the reality of it is like, we're proud of the work that we do and we love to do it. And, you know, we don't agree with all the decisions that people running competitions make. And it's not just the CrossFit Games. Like I said, we've worked with other competitions and made suggestions, and, you know, we accept some risk of safety. Like that's inherent in everything. And we get that, but we're trying to mitigate, you know, unnecessary risk where we can. And we're kind of done accepting like this willful disengagement from safety conversations. You know, it's, I think if something's wrong, there's two options. You can pack up your toys and leave, or you can try to fix it. And like, we're sort of in the position where, you know, we've been doing this a while, and what I would like to do is try to fix the toys for the next bunch of guys behind me to play with. And like that would be the ideal situation to us, is like, you know, if there's some things that we can see or have seen over the course of a 10-year career that have been like, man, you know, maybe this or that could be done a little better and we can have a better, brighter future. I feel like I'd be crazy not to try. And I know maybe that's not everybody's attitude, You can be the defeatist that's like, I'll take my toys and go home. But, we feel like it's maybe a more noble approach to try to do something about it and just like create a better thing up for the next guys, like the younger generation of athletes. So that this, some of these problems they don't have to deal with, right? This might be a thing that can be a problem of the past.
Yeah. Why not just wait for the investigation to be over before you guys put out any demands whatsoever?
I mean, it's not, again, it's not just about the 2024 games, right? Like, it's not just about the results of the investigation. It's about this long-term systematic behavior. And, we're aware that the context of the information of the 2024 games gave us a little more confidence to say, make firmer demands. But, I think that the investigation is not the main focus. We look forward to seeing the results like everyone, and hopefully they're disclosed in full, but we're not purely focused on the 2024 games, and our demands won't change they don't hinge based on the results of the investigation. I think CrossFit can and maybe will choose to release as little or as much of the information as they want. But this just goes a lot deeper than that. And I think it was important for us to take fast and firm action to just show all the seriousness of the PFAA and the athletes in general in response to what happened. And one thing that we have dealt with in meetings with them in the past is that issues can be flagged and they're spoken about initially, and then over the course of time, interest dwindles, and then another competition happens and another one happens, and then it fades to background noise, and then we'll pick this up later, and then it gets kind of dropped, right? So I think there was a little bit of concern that the length of time that the investigation would take, people would forget. Mm-hmm. And I think having these demands out kind of creates a little bit of an urgency and at least interest from the public and timelines for people to maintain interest. Our demands, the timeline basically follows the same as the investigation. Like we will be unlikely to do anything tangible until after the investigation is done, because we understand the importance of that. But I think it was important for CrossFit to see something early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what has been the response from CrossFit and kind of a follow-up too? Because I think this was, given the recent events of yesterday, were you guys aware of Luca's story and stance when you made those demands?
Yeah, I mean, the response, at least from CrossFit so far, has been, we've spoken to them, and any decisions they make are going to be when they make them in tandem, when everyone else hears them publicly, like what their next steps are with the sport team and with kind of everything. So we're not privy to anything that anyone else is, and I think those will wait based on the investigation. We were, the board was aware of Luca's story, but we were not certain if he would ever go public with it. We knew that CrossFit knew those details, right? And so it's the responsibility of the board to be a shield for athletes, make decisions based on information we're given, shared privately with us, keep those things private. Knowing that there could be some sort of like litigation or something, we didn't know if those things would ever be public. But yeah, it was, it was one of many factors in our decision, but like certainly not the only one by a large margin.
What do you do as an organization and as athletes if CrossFit looks at these demands and says, yeah, we're not doing any of that, and just moves on business as usual?
I mean, we worded the demands pretty deliberately. We have a plan, like a go-forward plan. We wanted to be firm. We wanted to be action-based and not talk in generalities. Again, we've done that for 4 years. So we've communicated in a professional manner and a private manner for a long time. So this was meant to be a public message with a strong stance. We wanted CrossFit to know that athletes wanted their concerns taken more seriously, and we felt it was necessary to make a strong immediate action. If they say no, it's a pretty clear signal that athletes are not factored into their priorities around the sport, athletes' concerns. And so, there is a plan. I think we're not going to disclose it yet. Just we'll wait until the end of this investigation and not really reveal all of our next steps. But we do have a go forward plan that will come into action once those those statements become public.
Are you confident enough that you, like, if you would have to go that route, that you have enough athletes on your side who would, you know, stand in solidarity with you and proceed to whatever option that plan is?
I mean, we're always obviously taking into account, like, the athletes are coming first for us, right? And so, you know, like the details of the plan and then the options for the plan will be, you know, discussed amongst athletes and, you know, privately in, you know, groups larger and larger as time goes on. And you know, we want to give athletes the choice to do whatever they feel is best for themselves and their career, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's hard, obviously, to get, you know, I mean, I don't think we're not ever going to have, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Unanimous support of any initiative that we do, right? And so we have to think in the best interest, you know, short term and long term for athletes, and just do everything we can.
Yeah, and speaking to that support, like their, you know, lack of unanimous support, I maybe missed this, but I don't know if there's been a ton of, like, very forward, like, public athlete support of the demands. Maybe there has been, maybe there haven't. You know, I've seen people sharing them, certainly, and athletes kind of reiterating those demands as well. But I also think that there might be a disconnect between, like, you know, the seasoned athletes and maybe, like, the up and comers, like the next generation too. And I'm curious what your insight is to that. Like, why do you think that is, or is there a disconnect or a difference in perspective that is causing that that difference in messaging?
I think there's you know, the longer you've been around, the more you've seen. I think that plays a big role in it. And I think athletes with more experience or just older athletes with established careers are more comfortable taking on, you know, leadership roles, and there's work involved behind the scenes, right? Like, you're taking on more calls, you're writing documents, you're emailing, like, it doesn't happen by itself. So I think maybe some of the younger athletes or newer athletes don't necessarily have the will or time to put into that. You know, we've spoken to lots of the young athletes. Our board is mostly some older, more experienced athletes, but a lot of the young athletes lend their support. There's still a culture of fear of speaking out, Tommy. Like, there people don't want to speak out and be seen as a mutineer for fear of retribution.
Yeah.
And I think that's existed for a long time, and it's harder when you're new on the scene, I think, to have that confidence. So, you know, I think we're maybe more confident that we can't be squashed quite the same way at this point, but that's a big piece of it, I think. And you know, we try to be a shield for those athletes, so those members of the board that are public and forward facing can be scrutinized. And you know, we don't share the private information of our members, and we don't share their stories unless they want to, and that's all part of it, right? Like, we want to be supportive of the athletes, and we put them first. So part of it is that, like, if they don't want to, or they don't feel comfortable, or they're scared of some sort of retribution, we're not trying to make people wave a flag for us. But they are read into those things, like the larger calls for the those statements that we put out, and everything else going on. So, you know, I would say there's a lot more support than it appears publicly. But yeah, I think in time, hopefully, people develop some confidence. You know, but they don't have to. We would never put pressure on the athletes to do anything.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, realistically, the safest move is to be silent and see what happens next, right? Like, I get that, right? So I think in some cases, and that's on whether, you know, you might stand on either side of this, on any stance, right? It's just sometimes a little easier to, you know, just see what happens.
It's also a difficult place to be in, I'd imagine, right? Like, you have more support than the public is aware of, right? Because while simultaneously that very fact speaks to the existence of the underlying issue around, like, the culture of fear. So I don't know. It just seems to me like you guys are in this position where you can speak up. You feel more comfortable in your careers and what you've done to do that. But you're kind of like hanging out there on this island a little bit with more information than people might ever know. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like I would just want to, like, sink my teeth in a little bit more.
If you only knew. Yeah, I think my wife told me she's written up a lot of replies to comments that she has erased. But I think it's just, again, like we can take a few bullets and a couple mean DMs. Like, that's no big deal. I think it is a bigger deal to some people in the athlete body. Like, if you're a 19-year-old female coming up and you plant your flag in the ground and then you're getting absolutely ripped apart in the comments, like, that fucks people up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a 35-year-old dude and, like, it's fine. I don't care what Glenn from wherever says. It's all good. Like, I have confidence and faith in what we're doing. And so it's okay. Like, we can do that. And that's why we're okay. We don't need to put pressure. That's the function, one of the functions of the board, right? It's why we do it the way we do it. So it's to help athletes and protect them. And we're going to continue to do it that way.
And that goes both ways too, right? I'm sure that, like I had a conversation with an athlete who doesn't agree with the third demand, right? But I explained in as much detail as I possibly could, given the need to keep some things private, obviously, but kind of expressed as many details as possible. Like, we want those people as much as anyone in the association, right? Like, if that athlete is an eligible voting member, it's like, please, like, I want that person to be a board member, right? Because we need differing points of view that are able to speak, ideally publicly, but also privately. And, and this happens in other sports too, right? So in sports like the NHL, like, players will speak and say, I don't like what the Players Association did this week and this and this. And they're paying like monthly fees. The Players Associations have done like incredible things for those athletes over the course of, decades. But, they still have some misses, or they still have stuff that's not going to be unanimously agreed upon by every single athlete. And so we want those athletes, so we're continuing to, like, an athlete gave us feedback that, hey, some of these calls, there's too many people on the call, and then you have athletes and maybe some coaches on the call, and it kind of creates this dynamic where athletes might be afraid to speak up. I'm like, damn, like, I just want everyone to have a conversation, and I feel comfortable speaking up, but it's like, you know what, you're right. So we're going to work on, some smaller calls, like whether it's one-on-one, but sometimes that's intimidating too. So it's like, okay, maybe it's like 7's the sweet spot. And having calls with just athletes is a new priority for us. And then having separate calls with coaches and agents. And some athletes want to be more represented. Be like, hey, agent, take the call. Let me know what I need to know. Like, I trust you. And other athletes are the opposite, where they're like, I don't trust agents. I don't trust coaches. Tell me. And there's going to be different athletes that are different in that way. And so, we're learning, and we're trying to adapt, and we want to lead by example on how to properly communicate privately and publicly.
Why do you think that fear of speaking out for fear of retribution, is that justified? Why does that still exist? I mean, I know of a couple instances where, yes, people have spoken out and then they get, berated publicly, or they get attacked or something like that. But
okay, so that's enough.
Yes, probably. But not. I'm trying to think of one from like the last couple years.
I mean, there's the problem is with, if CrossFit Games controls the opportunities, that's all you need.
Okay.
There's fear that if I say something that someone who's programming the competition doesn't like, I may be programmed out. And even in that respect, whether or not it's true, there's rumors of things like that happening over time. So that creates a fear. Mm-hmm. And then, fear silences the masses, and then that's all you need.
Yeah.
So if someone will tell the story, that's all you need. And so I think there's just things like, maybe you get passed over to go to an open announcement, or back in the day, you get passed over to go to the invitational, or, there's things like that I think used to exist more, and opportunities you could be shunned on. But the fear of being programmed out, or, quarterfinals, I got a major penalty and I'm out now for the season. Like, those fears are real for athletes, because your entire year hinges on one linear system with no takebacks. And it's like, one mistake, or you anger the wrong person, and you got there's fear that things like that could happen. And I know people always say like, that's hearsay, that's this and that. Like, again, we have some stories, and whether or not people choose to believe them, it's enough to create fear and mistrust.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, I personally, don't believe that any like a penalty or an appeal has not been granted based on like a personal vendetta. Like, I really don't believe that. And which is like, not to, like, we want the appeals and penalties process to be better. Right. And so we've reached out like, hey, we'd love to collaborate on this. Here are some ideas. It's like, no, it's fine. We got this. And like, I don't believe that anything they've done in those regards for sure has ever been like malicious intent or, you know, subversive or like, oh, this is like my favorite person, so I'm going to give this other person a penalty to get them in. I don't believe that, but I have seen a lot of penalties that to me don't make logical sense. And then in the absence of better communication and in the absence of trying to create a better system, you start to put pieces together in your own head. So I think that's where the fears can sometimes come from. And then there are like real substantiated stories about other things that it's like, yeah. And
I think at the end of the day, it's the long-term erosion of trust, right?
Yes.
I think that's what underlies a lot of that is like, then if you feel as though truly you cannot trust like that organization, that team, or a certain person, then it's hard. Like people are, then they, like Brent said, they get in their own head, or you get anxiety over various things, or you're, you know, that's I think the big problem is the erosion of trust. That's, you know, it's basically gone.
Yeah. And speaking to that erosion of trust, I mean, like, are there any specific concerns that you guys have brought up that you feel like, assuming some people haven't heard some of our conversations in the past, or, you know, aren't super clued into some of the things the questions that you've raised in the past, but can you speak to some of the specific concerns over the years or even this year that you feel like have gone, you know, unheeded by CrossFit?
Yeah, I think, you know, we have two public things that are on our website. Obviously, this year was just relation in heat preparation. And so it wasn't even like keep us out of the heat. It was just, or you know, this amount of heat is too much heat. It was just, can we have some indication as to the amount of heat we'll be exposed to so athletes can, you know, safely prepare, specifically those living in cooler climates. So, you know, having 3 weeks notice or 4 weeks notice, if you need to do a 2-week heat prep and then you work backwards from the games, like, well, there's like, you know, a couple day deload and I have to travel. It's like, that's not a lot of time. Like, and that's what we were just trying to make apparent, that having as much time as possible for those athletes to safely prepare for the heat, especially, you know, like really extreme potential Fort Worth heat. And then the year prior, we raised some concerns about, you know, E. coli in the lake. This is public on the website. You know, squatting with a wet platform, cutting the ropes, and yeah, and you know, again, we it's not like we've come to these and you can listen to those, and those are like very, very basic things, right? And that's what we've tried to do, is start with like the absolute basement level of considerations, and then, you know, our goal is to progress from there. But if we get a 1-sentence response, you know, in response to a 2-page, you know, professionally kind of drafted document, it's hard to, what else are you going to push for? Are you going to start saying, hey, I want to see the entire, you know, emergency action plan for your event? It's like, that's not really a realistic thing to ask for or expect a response to.
One thing that I see a lot of, and it's, I just kind of find it funny, is that whenever someone brings up safety, or when the PFAA brings up safety, there's this group that goes right to, oh, they don't want to do anything tough, and we need to start wearing helmets when we do wall balls, and we, you know, this, and I feel like this is going to be it's probably more of a statement than anything. I'd just like to get your thoughts on it. That it's not that you're saying we can't do difficult things. The games should be difficult. I think they should be. They should push people. But it's those things that we're doing should be in the safest conditions possible. Like, I don't think it's like you can do Murph at the games, but we just don't want to do Murph in 100-degree weather with no water or shade, when there's a better option to do that, to where athletes are more protected. Is that more or less what you're talking about? And
Pat wants to wear a helmet for burpees, I heard.
Well, obviously.
I mean, wearing a helmet every time I'm on a competition.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I've worn a helmet doing chest to bars and toes to bar at the games.
Yeah, so it was like bike to work.
I did terrible in that workout. No, that's it, right? I mean, you know, I think there's a fundamental nature of our sport. I think Pat put it to me, like, there's an orthopedic risk, right? It's like, oh, my knees are sore, I tore my hands, right? And by the nature of having like a complete broad test, short events, fast events, heavy, long, it's like that's going to be grueling, you know, if you do multiple events a day. But I think something I've kind of harkened back to is, when you can literally program anything, you should be able to program like the safest version of, you know, the tests, or the safest version possible of, you know, what needs to kind of the boxes that need to be checked to find the fittest. Yeah. And I mean, just like, you know, even in fighting, they're punching each other in the head, but in that sport, there's a chance that they exchange blood, and so they're tested in a lot of those leagues for blood-borne viruses and stuff like that, so that they're not getting infected. And they're punching each other in the head. We're not doing that, and we don't get tests for blood-borne viruses because it's not that common. They clean the pull-up bars between heats, so we're not going to be exchanging blood. So it's like different levels depending on the sport. Reasonable safety requests, right?
Yeah, I don't think a helmet would have saved Pat on the cargo net.
Just need better decision-making algorithm for myself. But I think like I don't know which one of you said it, but the if there's another option, right? Like it was something to the effect of like if there's another clear alternative, like doing Murph outside is fine as long as we like there are ways to make things safer or mitigate unnecessary risk. And I think one of the major ones we deal with is like environmental when things are outdoors, because that's where things are less predictable. Arena events are pretty predictable as long as you're not being really reckless and like let's climb a 50-foot rope. Like there is a limit to how high we should be able to climb without a harness or something. Like that's not what we're going to get into because it's not something that we've had to deal with at all. But if someone decided one day they wanted to be like, hey, we're going to put a climbing wall up that's 3 stories, then that would be a conversation that I hope that they would be interested in having. And our whole thing is just like, you need to be interested in having the conversation about safety, especially if we're willing to push the boundaries of things and say, things are going to get heavier and higher and faster and longer. And like, if we're trying to move that direction, there are limits, and there needs to be, as we start to approach new lengths and new heights and new whatevers and explore new horizons, that needs to be something that's considered. And if you're not interested in having that conversation, then I don't know, you shouldn't be in a position to run that event.
Is that why then there was the leap towards calling for the removal of Castro versus like something that maybe is less instantly polarizing, like just listing out all these safety regulations that you want, or listing specific standards that you want?
Yeah, like I think just because something, obviously making this decision was like divisive by some people's estimation, and just because something maybe is a bit divisive or challenging doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong thing to do. I think we think it can benefit the entire global CrossFit community and the athletes if the sport improves, and we think this is just like an important step along that way. We all, not everyone was, and I think to your point, like we've attempted to give these things, right? We've given hey, here's 5 things we can do to improve safety. Like we've attempted to do those things already numerous times, and this is like a final breach of trust. And so maybe from other vantage points, there's the opinion of, well, give them a second chance. And I just feel like, the sport team has had a lot of chances, right? And there's a lot, like they've had a lot of chances, and we just feel like change is required to move forward right now.
So along those lines, there's a contingency of people who are very much staunchly behind Dave Castro. They want to see him stay. They believe he is the games and he should not be going anywhere. And they're saying, PFAA is trying to, they're canceling Dave. What do you say to those people right now?
Look, we have a lot of empathy for people at a human level that are involved in this situation right now. Everything from, the people at CrossFit, the Djukic family, the athletes competing, people who are concerned in their affiliates and stuff. But I mean, people can get fired still. Like, it's not cancel culture. If someone consistently ignores responsibilities over the course of years and then performs their job poorly on a certain year at the time when they needed to be the best, and then something really bad happens, like that's how people get fired. Like that's the world of business and real life. So I think the position that team is in right now, they're in a team where they need to make a big change. I think that that's the reality of it, right? There's been sustained and repeated behaviors that have, in our opinion, gone against the interests of CrossFit. And I think change is hard. People are unfamiliar with what the games would look like without Dave, or what CrossFit would look like without Dave. But, I mentioned before, like, I don't know who invented hockey, but I love it just the same. I think that CrossFit started as this challenger brand in the fitness space, and it had to grow and compete against and grab your attention away from other things. And I think that it needed a persona like that in its infancy to grow to what it is. And Dave was integral in making that happen. And I think he did a lot of great things for the company and for the sport. I think that it's a different time now, and CrossFit is mainstream, and it's a different thing. And I don't think that he's necessarily at least what the sport need to continue to grow. And he may still have an awesome role and serve do a lot of good in the education department and with affiliates and things like that. We just feel like the trust has been breached so drastically amongst athletes that it's hard to imagine a road back.
Yeah, there's something funky going on with your audio, I think. It was like, we got most of that, but it was just like a little, little.
Like that. It was like Daft Punk.
It was like a little,
Yeah, exactly.
I thought a rave was going to start behind you. Brent, do you have any thoughts on that, or just?
I mean, yeah, Pat kind of hit it on the head. I think obviously, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Pat and I have been doing this for a really long time. Like we love this sport so much. It's like given us everything, right? We all, we started it in just a gym, and now we're here, right? Like we're going to Southern California to compete on like an all-star team, right? It's crazy. And we just really care about, making it better and having it last for another, 10 years for the next group. And we just feel like this is like we never wanted like to get to this. Like I don't like having these calls, quite frankly. But it just feels like something has to change, right? And we feel like this is, based on our experiences, and this seems like the best way to move forward. It's a tough thing, but cool. I think it could be the best thing to work for the entire sport. So.
Well, guys, yeah, we're starting to have some funky audio issues, so I think that's a good place to end it. I think we got to everything we wanted to get to. Definitely looking forward to seeing the both of you back on the competition floor down in Southern California. I know the trash talk has already been very entertaining, so please keep that up.
That picture of the worm is fantastic.
Yeah.
You should put that up if you can superimpose it.
We'll try to find it. Yeah.
I'll keep that forever.
Brent, Pat, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate the conversation and appreciate your willingness to come on and answer some questions. And we'll see where this goes. So.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.